Welcome to Idea Citizen. Today we're talking about reinventing work and what exactly that means with Thru Shivakumar and Elaine Richards. Enjoy. For the listeners, Thru Shivakumar is one of my dear friends. We actually met back in the 6th grade. Elaine, Thru, I would like to know how you guys met, and then let's go around and do some self-introductions.
Okay. Elaine, you want to do it or shall I?
Sure. So Thru and I met through a mutual friend, and they went to Kellogg together. So met socially, and then I think found out that we had some professional intersections as well, which has just been really fun. Always great to network with other women in the space, and here we are.
Yeah. Elaine used to live in Chicago, and we actually never met in Chicago. We met down in Miami, and then she subsequently moved out west. Jackie, you've been out west. We met in Chicago too, and I'm the Lone Ranger sitting in Chicago still.
Enjoy the cold.
How's that working out for you today?
It's cold. It is very cold here.
And Elaine, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Sure. So I am currently an assistant professor of the practice at University of Denver, Daniels College of Business, which I started very recently, actually in the fall quarter, so just a few months ago. And up until that point, I was a C-suite executive in a number of growth stage companies in sort of tech and media. So I had the privilege of being part of the team that took Cars.com public in 2017, was part of Wyzant, which was exited to a strategic advisor, and mostly recently came out of 37 Signals, which is, I think, most popularly known by their flagship product, Basecamp. So a lot of, different rotations through different spaces, but I think what they have in common is, being at interesting points in their growth inflection and having interesting organizational, problems that they're trying to untangle.
Hi everyone, Thru Shivakumar. I'm the CEO and founder of Cohesion. Cohesion is a smart building software platform that we started about 7 years ago. Out of a spinoff from a large mechanical engineering company here in Chicago. My background, though, is not in software. So my background is in corporate finance and more business strategy and operations, and went to Hyatt Hotels as my second job out of college. And Hyatt Hotels was a really cool opportunity. I was on the ground team for Hyatt Place, which is a very successful brand flagship for Hyatt as a whole. And it's just interesting because I got to be part of every decision, and it started my entrepreneurial kind of zest and thirst for wanting to be at the table. That was the start of my real estate journey, and made my way into spending a couple years at the City of Chicago's Economic Development Council, working on real estate and large-scale real estate and infrastructure projects for the City of Chicago. Then went to be a chief of staff for a fairly significant name finance and civic leader in Chicago, and then started Cohesion. So it's been a really great ride. I've learned a lot, been in a lot of different industries and spaces, but real estate and the built environment has been kind of the root of everything I've been part of. And Cohesion for 7 years, and it's learned a lot. Nobody gives you a playbook for running a startup in the real estate space during a global pandemic, and the biggest shift in, I think, our lives, and I think anybody's life in terms of the working environment and the office environment. So this is very dear to my heart of the topic that we're talking about today.
We're gonna jump into a lot of those things. I don't actually start these calls with even an introduction of myself, but I think it would be relevant here. I consider myself a marketer at heart. Marketing, project management. I feel like that's ultimately where my career is. That's ultimately what my career has encapsulated. I started Idea Citizen, which was formerly named TED Ideas Were Spreading Unofficial, which there's a whole story behind that. I feel like that would be an episode on itself. But I started the LinkedIn group back in 2007 or 2008, and really started off as just a TED Talk fan group. And as of recently, the group's quite large. The group's about 1.5 million members, and I've been thinking to myself, I think that there's an opportunity here for people to create some content, maybe leverage my network, leverage the people within the group to kind of have some interesting and engaging conversations that ultimately brings us to today and what we're discussing. So we're here to talk about reinventing work. So let's start with some baseline definitions, because I think that's going to be important for where this conversation goes. I think we have three main dissections in the world today post-COVID of what work really looks like. So we're talking in office, we're talking hybrid, and you're talking remote. Let's, I guess, Elaine, would you like to kind of define any one of those three, and maybe through, maybe you take on whatever else?
Sure. So, I think it's worth calling out a couple of things, right? So, first, only about 60% of jobs are what you'd call remote capable, right? So, there's some jobs like factory work, like some in hospitality, right, that are just inherently in person because that's where the service is delivered. So, that's about 40% of jobs. And then when we take those away, then there's about 60% of them that can be done remotely. So, typically, when we talk about like who can be remote and who can be hybrid, we're talking about subsets of that population. We look from a research perspective, we tend to look at remote as like full remote, right? So like there's no office, I don't go to it, doesn't happen. Hybrid, which there are many flavors of hybrid, many flavors of hybrid, right? That go into just how often you're at a shared company office, company location with others. And then there's full in person, even though that the remote could be, or job could be done remotely, right? And then I think one more thing that's worth calling out is something that I like refer to as like flexibility or availability, because I think it's worth calling that out separately. Where I sit geographically is one thing, and maybe that doesn't matter, or maybe it does, but what are my working hours is a big deal, right? And sometimes that's a bigger deal, particularly for companies that have employees globally, and so there's, or even nationally, and there's a big time zone difference. That can almost be a bigger deal than where I'm. And I think that a lot of folks are, we talk a lot about remote in terms of geographic location, but I think a lot of people, what they really value is a lot of flexibility in terms of, it's not me plastered to this chair from 9 to 5 every day. It's me, and I'm here, but if I have to go pick up a kid from school or take a pet to the vet or whatever, right, I have the flexibility to do that. And so I think that creates sort of an interesting interset of ideas.
And Elaine, you said, just a question to clarify, you said 60% of jobs are remote capable. Where do you put like healthcare? Is that part of like the 60%, or is that also split between 60-40 there?
Well, yeah, no, I think you absolutely have to look at it by job, right? So if I am a hospital nurse, well, then I can't do a whole lot of hospital nursing from home. But if I'm a hospital administrator, then conceivably I don't need to be in the building.
I think it's, the reason I ask that is because I think that there's so much debate, and I don't know if it's as global looking at, who our clients are and the conversations that I have. I'm not sure that this is as big of a global issue because different cultures, different countries, and different kind of structures of how people, like there's generational housing situations that don't allow for remote to even be capable, right? Even though the job could technically be done on a computer sitting somewhere. I don't know if this is as big of an issue everywhere else in the world. I know there's pockets of elsewhere, but what do you see and what do you think of it being a US?
That's really interesting, right? So I don't have great country by country stats, but I can absolutely tell you that it is different internationally. So for example, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when people were starting to come back into the office from the pandemic, I was working with a financial services firm that has a global footprint, and they were having a lot of trouble with their US based employees who flat out didn't want to come back to the office, and a lot less trouble in the UK for whatever reason, right? So truly, maybe it's willingness to comply, the Americans and their renegade spirit, or what it is, but it's definitely different.
Why we're even having this conversation in the first place, because I mean, and from my perspective, if you think about it, pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, this was not really a topic of a conversation whatsoever. And it's interesting,
right.
Just, I mean, let's be honest though, like, I think media, like everybody likes a little clickbait, everybody likes to click on something. So it's like, there's very much like these polarizing perspectives that are presented, ad dollars, whatnot. But ultimately, there are real implications to it. And so, Elaine, I mean, you've teased out just kind of different roles and responsibilities and how potential flexibility is even attainable through. From a leadership standpoint, I'd be curious from you, like you have a team, the product, the Cohesion technology relies on, or it's benchmarked ultimately in creating an environment and creating additional access for people that come into the office. So health quality of air and everything, like these things are important. Like if you're going somewhere on a day-to-day basis, it is nice to know that like you're working in a safe environment where air quality post-pandemic and everything is a relevant thing. I anticipate you're running an entire team. Elaine, you've also done that in your prior organizations. Have you found it? How has it been for you working with your team during times where it was kind of forced remote versus in office? Like, have you seen pros and cons? What do you prefer? What do you like what's easier as well?
I have lots of thoughts. Thru, you want to start?
Me too. So I think we can touch on a lot of topics on that. So I think like just kind of wrapping up the global conversation, I think that we can limit what we're talking about to, the American return to work at this point, or North American, because I do think that some of Canada is dealing with this too. But and the reason, like I said, I know a lot of folks in Asia Pacific do come to work because they don't have like the space constraints, and the ability to actually work in multi-generational households doesn't exist. So we'll talk about it. I think if you all agree, we'll talk about it from the American standpoint. And Elaine, I think there is a bit of the renegade spirit that I see a lot of. And I think there's just the element of independence that I think America puts forward. Like, I think that's just part of the American culture of a lot of independence that allows for people that want the ability to work remotely. But I think more than just the ability, I think it's choice. I think there's a lot of independence and choice of what people want. And I think that as an employer and as a leader of a smart workplace platform, it's choice is hard for people to plan around, right? How many workers are there in the United States? Like how many people?
No idea.
If we were to take choice, yeah.
If we were
Elaine, do you know how many like people? Like, are we talking about 30, 100 million people in office jobs? Like, what's the number?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we think about that, right? Like 100 million people in office using jobs, that employers have to take 100 million personal choices and preferences to plan around. That is asking a lot of the employer, the company, to make those personal preferences. And I think that just as an overarching theme from my end, right, it is really hard to personalize experiences at mass scale like that. And that is one of the things that I think is the hardest that everyone is dealing with, whether you're an employee or an employer or the government or cities with urban planning. We don't understand all of the personal choice. And so I'll just leave that as like an opening discussion point to say, I think that that's what makes this whole conversation very difficult, with no right or wrong to one viewpoint versus the other.
Yeah, I agree. It's a lot about personal choice, right? So personal choice of geography, partially, personal choice of time. And I think that's worth talking about a little bit, because personal choice, what we know from a research perspective and an organizational behavior perspective, is a reason why people love personal choice is because it's a reflection of autonomy, and sometimes it's a reflection of competence. And those two things are huge drivers of motivation. So if you can think about, your own work experience or your own life experience, in places where I feel like I'm in more control of what I'm going to do, and I feel like I'm trusted and empowered to do things how I see fit, that's really motivating, right? As opposed to somebody who tells you in exact detail. I mean, this is why people don't like micromanagement, right? Somebody who just dictates to you everything you're going to do, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, and you're like, okay, right? So I think a lot of the reason why this has come to fore is personal choice. And I think a lot of it comes down to motivation, is that, people feel good or feel better about the work that they do when they have this kind of choice. So I think that's a big one. I think the place, you're right, through, millions of people's personal choice is pretty hard to manage. And we've seen 3 rounds of push-pull between management and workers on, right? Like, are we recession? Are we quiet quitting? Are we where does the labor market stand? We're going back and forth every 6 months. And, I think we're still a little ways away from having that sorted out. But I do think companies have a right. I don't have a strongly held belief in this, by the way. I've worked fully in person, fully remote, hybrid, all the variants. My personal belief is that it comes down to the company and the leadership. But before we go there, I think that managing to a whole lot of personal situations is difficult, and a company has a right to say, look, this is what we believe and this is what we need to get our work done, right? And people have a right to buy into that or not. And I think that's where we're still not quite evolved, is that there's still like, maybe this is emblematic of like overall tensions in the country right now, where it's just so polarized and everything is like, black or white. You're either on the right side or the wrong side, whichever it is. And there isn't a right or wrong here. It's same as it was before in some respects. You get to choose. Do you like this company or not? Do you like these sets of perks, benefits, pay, work or not? And then, and companies get to choose how they want to present themselves to meet their talent acquisition and retention strategies.
And I think that, go ahead, Jackie.
I was gonna say, to that point, and I've also done a variety of different organizational kind of in-work or work models, and there's pros and cons to both. And the reality is that there is nice, say, if you do work in a more hybrid or remote model, to have some face time every so often when the opportunity presents. I think that there's good and bad. It's like you go into the office sometimes, like it's kind of nice. You have like a dedicated opportunity to, with different distractions and everything, to devote yourself. And then also at moments, like it's really relieving to be able to have the flexibility to work, say while you're visiting family or at home or whatever. And it's very situational, and it depends very much on the role, the leadership, the relationship you have. And I don't think that there is going to be any solution that works for 100 million people. And that's the nice thing, that like we don't have to really contend with that. It's very much, at least the organizations I've been a part of, it's very much based on company-wide or even department-wide, where those leaders of those various different departments actually have the autonomy to make those decisions.
I definitely don't think there's one solution, but I think that is just like setting setting the values of an organization. I think the physical space value is one that needs to be defined, and everyone is dancing around it. Like I think every organization is very different, but I do think it's a stage conversation. Like, what does your company do? What is it like? How much innovation is actually needing to happen? How much growth are you looking at? Like, high growth companies are very hard to do with an entire workforce remote, right? High growth companies that are innovating, even harder to do fully remote. So there is, like, is that a full-time in-person? Is that, what does their hybrid work model look like? How do you define that? And I'll argue that I think a lot of, if executive and senior leadership doesn't define what that looks like from a value perspective, it makes mid-level managers and others, it makes it really difficult. They can kind of hide in autonomy, saying, yeah, sure, I'll do whatever. But what often, well, at least from what I've observed, I'd love to hear kind of research side of this, but I think people will just default to what's the easiest and least conflict. And so you could talk about it being autonomy, but I think that structure and guidance is really valuable at all levels of the organization, so that people can make the choice of, yes, I believe in this and this works for me, or it doesn't.
Well, let's be clear. Mid-level managers you called out, and I think we've talked about this before. I mean, mid-level managers are the people who've gotten screwed here, right? Because they're in this tough spot between the front line and between senior leadership, and senior leadership wants one thing, which, let's be honest, is often not popular with the front line, and they're carrying the message with generally not a ton of support and maybe not even a lot of personal conviction. So there's a whole issue here for the entire middle layer of management, whatever that means in your company, and what they've had to contend with, what they've had to message and gotten, in my view, not nearly enough support for. But I do agree, Thru, like, this is about what is a company and what is the company culture and what are you trying to say about your company, and your physical space is a huge part of that. I like to say, culture is derived from the stories we tell. So while we might think it's those 6 words that we printed up and pasted in the elevator, culture is really defined by the stories we tell and the things that you do, right? So one of my favorite things to ask people is like, tell me a story about your company. Tell me a story about Cohesion. Tell me a story about Wyzant. And people, pause for a second. They're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, just, tell me something that like everybody knows in the office that's like really common. And it's very interesting, the different types of stories that you'll get. Either in one company, it was about like the CEO who drove employees home in the rain. But in another company, it was about a CEO who like randomly decided that they should spend a whole bunch of money buying t-shirts for some like unclear purpose. Like, and it's all very telling about what the company believes and values. Again, no different than your space. So your space should tell that same story, right? What it looks like, where it is, and what you use it for. And I just think there's, some, yeah.
Where my head goes with what you just said, Elaine, is that like, I wonder the impact of remote work and the requirement for remote work during the pandemic. I wonder if it was a little bit of if it resulted in a lot of culture actually within organizations dissolving. And I think that's unfortunate because I think I've been at organizations where it's like you're drinking the Kool-Aid and everything. You're like, yes, 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 like let's do this. And to also add to that though, where it was also a period of time in my life where I think my needs were also a little bit different, but it's fun. It can be a lot of fun. And like you're in the trenches with your colleagues and everything. You're kind of, if you need, like, there's late nights, there's lunches and everything. There's collaborative working together. There's in-person meetings, like where you're actually like in a real-time response and everything. And, not dealing with like, hey, can you guys hear me can you guys hear me? Or is my video working? Or where is so and so? We're here talking about reinventing work, but I think what I'm taking from this a little bit is like, what a heavy lift of rebuilding culture to bring that fabric within any sort of organization back together. I think that's been decimated ultimately. And I wonder, part of this too, and let me know what you both think, but it's like, I also wonder, like, is there a generational divide with some of these things? And how do you rebuild this to, I don't know, like, ultimately, like, no matter where you're working, are you in the big goal of like what your organization is driving for and the relationships that you're building? It's just a big question for me. I don't have an answer.
So I'll start. I know, Elaine, you're going to have some ideas here, but I think the big thing to really think about is that it's what Elaine said. The physical space is part of your culture. It is not separate. So when you have teams that are separately thinking about space planning, that doesn't bring into the picture of how the human side of this works in, how the cultural side of this works into that space planning. I see this all the time, that it's two separate functions, right? There's completely, the one side doesn't talk to another. And that physical space, if we think about, all of us are, mid-career, we'll just put it without saying our ages. We had a good run of at least 15 years of our early career where most of us had an opportunity to be in office. Let's say even if it was the early 2000s where we did get the benefit of being in the office. Now, yes, was there commuting pains? Yes, was there frustration of diversity challenges or inclusivity? All of those are a yes. But if we strip out some of those things and think about we didn't hate going to the office. We enjoyed it. We look forward to the water cooler conversations. We look forward to catching like a glimpse of a conversation, to overhear a senior executive talking. We looked forward to raising our hands to work on the special project or be part of that task force. And we thought it was an honor to be chosen, right? Those are things that, like, when I talk to some of my friends, like in my age group, I'll put it out there, I'm in my 40s, I kind of talk to them about paying it forward. I'm like, if you're not, I understand that you don't think you have to be in the office, but I have younger employees now that thrive to be in the office so they can get what we got. We got that, right? We got that middle, like in this age range of like somewhere between 35 and 50. And so I will say that I don't think it's generational, actually. Like, I don't think there's a generational. I think it's a life stage standpoint of wanting flexibility and thinking about it from the very lens of me, not what I owe as a community or a society or as a leader inside of my company. So I urge people to think about, what is it that you loved when you were early career? And what is it that you owe to those in their early career that we need to train? We owe training, we owe advisory, we owe people the ability to hear those conversations and absorb. We can't train and or get people to the level that we got if we don't understand what others need. And so I'm a big believer, if you guys can't hear it from my thoughts, I'm a big believer in the office. Now, I don't necessarily think everybody, again, coming back to what kind of company you have, I don't think it has to be 5 days in the office every single day. I think there is an element of flexibility, but I do think that everything hinges on communication, and it's got to start with leadership. So from that, I'll pause for a second because I see Elaine.
So really interesting, right? I think some of us have a perception that younger people, particularly those who, spent their last couple of years of college in their own room, learning remotely or whatever, right? Really they don't like to wear not sweatpants. They don't like to leave the house. And what's been really interesting to me is that couldn't be less true. So I worked with a firm last year who had, as many companies do, right? By definition, the way the business grows and is taught is sort of like informal apprenticeship, right? So junior people come in the junior role and they learn from the more senior people, not in a structured way, in an experiential way. And the younger people and the more senior people in the office did not want to come in. And the more junior employees were like, if we go all remote, I'm leaving because I need to have an organization where I can learn. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I teach undergraduates and graduates at DU. And my most recent undergraduate class, we were doing an exercise where they kind of do a decision matrix on a few different job offers and what they would take. And so they have to rank order and prioritize, different aspects of the offer that they think are interesting to them. Hands down, every single one of them put ability to work remote dead last.
Fascinating. This is totally blowing my mind. But
don't care. It is not important to me. And in fact, some of them, there was an offer that said you work full remote, and some of them dinged that offer in the reverse. So they want to be there. They see the value of in-person communication. And I think Thru, you nailed it, right? It's the things that do you remember when you were younger in your career and you ended up in the same elevator as the CEO and you're like, oh, right? Let me think of something really brilliant to say right now. God help me. What's it going to be, right?
Don't say anything stupid.
Don't say anything dumb right now. Or, you caught that senior director after the meeting and they asked your opinion. And this was a meeting that you would otherwise been completely, mute at because, you're the junior person. You didn't even rank a seat at the table. You were by the wall, right? We've all done that. So it's those kinds of opportunities, right? To talk about generational or life stage. I think it could be life stage. I also think, quite frankly, it's newness in role. Right? So imagine even if today you and I joined a completely new company, and I haven't done this, right? And you join completely remote, here's you and your laptop,
you're blind. You're blind to everything. You have no reference point to anything.
You can't
see context. What do you even ask? Where do you start?
Yeah. You have no context, right? And so you don't get any of the stuff, right? So you don't know the office politics, right? What managers, departments, you don't know who's actually got the real power to get things done in the organization. None of those cues are obvious because all you get is very transactional Zoom meetings of whatever kind.
Some people may or may not turn on their camera even, so you don't even get that half the time.
Right. And so, right, you don't get the body cues, right? So we've got this much, but I mean, how many meetings have you been to where you, the person just barely has their head up above the thing? So you can't see the arms folded. You can't see any of that. So you miss all those cues. So it's just really hard. So really hard for new people. And then just one more point, right? Let's remember it is now late 2024. We are 4.5 years since the start of the pandemic. How much turnover has there been in any given team or organization since 2020? So if you were riding on the fact that Thru and I know each other because we used to work in the same office, so I know how she is, right? I know that when she gives me resting face, that's just her, right? Versus I'm brand new. I've never met Thru before. I'm oh my God, she hates every word I say, right? And you just don't know. You have no context, and so. 4 years, math is not my forte, so Thru, maybe you can do this one. Net present value of 4 years worth of turnover across the country, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think we're still talking easily 25% turnover in any given company. And that's huge, right? And so that's 25% of people who don't have the stories that we used to have, who have no mechanism to build new stories, because what are we going to tell? The story of that time we were on Zoom, right? And so the number one thing as I talk to companies about remote and hybrid work that they ask me is, how do we preserve culture? As the number one thing they ask me.
Do you ask them, what is your culture first? What are you preserving?
I do. And then that's how we get into the culture is told by stories, because they don't know, right? And then I get things oh, we believe in integrity and, customer value. I'm great. What does that mean? What does that look like? Right? I mean, it's entirely possible, but show me how you live that, right? But what's really frustrating is that in lieu of having real culture, and real culture, again, built by the stories, right? People working together, people who succeed together, or people who like go through like hard crucible moments together, right? That's really bonding. That's really culture building. And in lieu of that, what we've seen a lot of companies do, and I think it's like maybe less now, but whatever, like nothing frustrates me more than Warm Cookie Wednesday. And it's not because I don't love cookies, okay? Like I am carbs all day long, but like, you know, free food and bev, you know, ostensibly you pay your employees, they can buy their own snacks, right? If that's what you're using in lieu of, and I get like you're bribing people to come in and all that kind of stuff, but like that's not culture building, and that's not what's going to get you there.
It's also not how parents are. I was just going to say, like, parents aren't bribing their kids with food anymore, right? Like that's, our parents might have done that when we were younger, but that's not what, I'm not a parent, but you two are. You're not bribing your kids with food anymore. Like,
yeah, that's a little not popular. You're not supposed to do that.
Exactly.
You're not supposed to do that.
So why do we think as employers then that that's what we do? I give a lot of free booze. I booze in the refrigerator. I've got free snacks. It's not what my team comes in for. It's not.
Absolutely not. It's absolutely not, right? And it makes, again, let's go back to behavioral research, intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is I can give you money, I can give you snacks, I can give you booze, I can whatever. And to a point that might work. But if you can capture intrinsic motivation, right? I want to do it because it's important to me. I think it's valuable. I see where the purpose fits. That'll be any extrinsic you can do any day, all day.
So if the challenge is,
I agree.
The challenge we're actually speaking to, if anything, like we're not the resistance for, or the request for remote isn't really coming from, say, the younger Gen Z people coming up, then how do you build up a culture or an environment within an organization? Or let's say it's either the culture, or how do you have tools to allow for like a little bit of like work flex where somebody can come in and still do that mentorship and part of it? Like, what does this look like? How can organizations build themselves up to, I don't know, how do you say that, to be a little bit more appealing to people at a certain place in life where they need a little bit more flexibility? Because I don't think everybody is necessarily fully anti going into the office. I think that there's, Elaine, to your, like, it's like a little bit of flexibility is helpful. And it is nice seeing people. Like some of my best friends, my lifelong friends, did come from various organizations that I work with. Like, I don't know what that looks like today. Today, the relationships are a little bit, they're just different. And I don't know if that's due to a place in life, a time in life and everything, or due to kind of hybrid remote work scenarios. So I guess going back to my question, and I'll ask you both, like, how do organizations do it to maybe entice people that would, if anything, be the natural mentors for these young people coming into the workforce?
So I have some conceptual ideas, but then I want to turn it to Thru, because I think Thru has seen more of this in practice. So I would say two things, right? One is we got into this really bad habit, I think particularly during the pandemic, of defining work in this really transactional way. My job is to write this report, pump out this spreadsheet, create this thing and turn it into the next person. We got into this mindset of making ourselves assembly line workers, or worse, frankly, gig workers, right? My job is to make this thing and then you pay me some money. And I don't actually think most of us want that. I think maybe there's some companies who would love to operate that way, and terrific. But I think as employers, as companies, right, mostly we're trying to do better than that. And so my responsibility as an employee is, yes, to do the things that I was hired to actually produce, but is also to contribute to the larger company, right? To contribute to mentorship, to contribute to development, to contribute ideas in other areas, to work cross-functionally. And we're not paying enough attention to those. And that's what's really falling through. And so when we allow ourselves to define work so narrowly, and especially in the United States, right, where we're very like independent, and me and mine, then, we're saying, well, it works for me and mine. It works for me to do my work this way and to be here and to sit on my couch and da-da-da. And if that's all I think my job is, then yeah, I'm pissed when like you make me go in, right? But if we look at it different, if we as companies define a job more broadly, and now we say, okay, so we need you to come into the office with whatever frequency cadence, whatever, right? With more purpose, and we're very intentional about that purpose. And again, this is where like middle managers have gotten shafted, right? Because it's on them to create that purpose, and we've given them no instruction or guidance on how to do it. Then it makes it more of like a rational thing to ask for, right? And to talk about. And how companies are actually doing it, I think through you see more about how people manage that and manage people coming in and so on than I do. So I'll stop there.
You said exactly what I was going to say, that I think if we just break it down into like what are the different, I think there's responsibilities across all. It's not just sitting on senior leadership. It is every single person has a responsibility in this conversation. One is I 100% agree that we transactionalized all of office work, and both of you might have heard me say this, but I will use the word hate because I hate this phrase and I don't use that often, but I hate the phrase of work and life balance. That implies that work and life are different and that they have different purposes. If we think about purpose of life, right? Purpose of life has many pillars. There's a lot of things that make up our lives, and our lives could be family, it could be friends, it could be health, it could be work. Work is a means to also accomplish all of the other things and enable you to be the best person that you can be. And so I think the purpose of life is to be the best across many different areas. I talked to this therapist once that essentially said the most unhappy people are the ones that think that they have one purpose in life. And so when you have many purposes in life, that brings about joy and happiness, because nothing is ever like everything is perfect all the time, right? Something's going to be out of whack. And so if you have many different purposes, you can be in a better state, I think, from a happiness perspective, whatever that means for anybody, if we can think about it all as as pillars of what makes up life. And so for me, I really just dislike that phrase of work-life balance because it almost antagonizes work as if it's the enemy. And I think to what Elaine said is that it's not transactional. In the office role, right? Where this is different is people say they want autonomy, but they want a transactional job. In a transactional job, that just doesn't make sense, because then you're told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And so it defeats what you're actually trying to accomplish. And so for what I think we need is the responsibility of leadership to define what that culture is and based on what are the needs of the organization. So again, growth stage, company type, product, service that you're selling, location, the persona of who you hire, all of those have to be taken into consideration. And I think there has to be a lack of cowardness to define that at the company level, at the senior leadership level. And then to what Elaine said was there needs to be training down to everybody else through the organization of what that actually means in practice from a cultural perspective. And what is the expectation? Believe it or not, humans actually, as a group of people, they like structure. That is as parents, do you put structure in place for children? People need structure. And so if we can define what that structure is, but allow for flexibility within that, allow for empathy to allow us to understand that there are going to be days that you're going to need to go to the dentist, and the dentist is only open 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So yes, you need flexibility, but that doesn't. So I think that's communication that then has to be on the employee and the manager's side to have those very real conversations, and an empathy that people have to understand that this is what we can adjust for. But understand that if there is a company need, let's say you made this appointment for a dentist appointment with your child, ages ago, but then a really important client meeting comes up. Oftentimes I see the employee picking the dentist, right? Not the client meeting. And that needs to be reconciled, I think, right? And if we can take away from transactional and define the purpose, then that employee is going to choose the meeting, right? And reschedule the dentist appointment, unless there's obviously an emergency. But these are the things that I think we just have to redefine it. And I think everyone has to take responsibility. And I think that there is a lack of responsibility being taken across multiple levels. And I'm talking very generically. Some people are doing this really well, but this is just, I see this a lot.
So what I'm also hearing, because I've found from like I've been in a little bit of leadership roles. I feel like my roles have kind of been more firmly cemented in like management and individual contributor capacity. Where I'm going with this is that like I think we got to back up a little bit. So we're talking about culture. We're talking about culture is one thing, and then I feel like company financial goals is a whole nother thing. I guess I would like to see, or I think potentially what needs to actually happen is like built into the company's financial goals should be like training and retention and mentorship of teams. And I don't know how that exactly works, but if mentorship isn't actually part of your bottom line, then honestly I don't feel like it actually happens. Like I think it ends up being or feeling very task related to get to whatever the financial goals, because if that's ultimately what you're being judged on, or your bonus is based on this, and I understand, this is a little bit of science art. Yes, the financials are pretty clear, black and white, but if you're not to some degree not judged or compensated, or at least if it's not built into at least like the prioritization for mentorship, I don't know if it's going to happen. And so maybe that backs into like culture and financial goals and incentives aren't incredibly aren't particular. I'm losing some of the words here, but it's like they play into one another. I guess I've just been at organizations sometimes where it's like, mentorship and development hasn't, I mean, it feels like it gets put on the back burner, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Well, let me ask this, Jax. When I hear this one a lot, actually,
Okay.
and I say to my team members, so like I've set up at Cohesion, I set up like a Cohesion mentorship network, and I placed people through my network with my employees to like offer mentorship.
Oh, wow.
Now, it's I've reached out, I've extended my network into my employees, but it is not for them to reach out to my employees to give them mentorship, saying, hey, Jackie, I want to mentor you. Please let me mentor you, right? What happens is that I'm guessing, I haven't actually taken stock, which reminds me that I've got to go ask, my people and ops manager how we're doing on that, how many people have actually kept up with their mentors, because it's been almost a year. But I hear this a lot, being like, oh, nobody will mentor me. And I ask the question, well, did you ask? Did you raise your hand? Did you set up the meeting? Did you go into the office? Did you knock on the door? What responsibility? Again, this is why I think everything is a two-way street. And I think there's been so much pressure put on the company to do everything. And it is just, when I have these conversations with some of my employees, they're like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And so this is where I come back to communication is so key for people to give grace on both sides. You have to understand how hard it is to lead an organization, big or small, in any capacity. And it's really hard to also be a employee in today's world and manage a family and manage everything. So I asked the question of how many times, like you say that they didn't invest in it. What did that mean to you? What did you want them to do?
Oh no, I guess what would help me as a team member ultimately would be like, say from, and I don't want to use the terminology from a prior organization, but like let's say performance reviews or whatever, or what, like, you're given certain key tasks. And I think it's not for the company necessarily to like dictate it, but if anything, an importance placed on, and this goes back culturally and everything, it's like mentorship, like what new skills that you've learned, or whatever this, or maybe some way to like make sure that it's ingrained in the fabric of the organization and individuals performance and growth within an organization, where it's like it's actually prioritized. Because I've never once seen on, say, like your yearly review and everything, like you have these certain tasks that you're like, how did you perform, did you hit these benchmarks and everything. And I guess there is a bit of the assumption that with hitting certain these benchmarks that you are learning and growing and everything, but it's never been, I feel like, explicitly stated. And I think that there may be value within an organization to legitimately make that part of like your yearly check-ins or review, for keeping, to a degree, for keeping to staying honest, I guess. I don't know.
So this is really interesting to me. Like, I think there are companies who believe it, and they believe in the value of development and mentorship and growing employees from within, and there are companies who don't. And You can tie it to comp if you want and create an extrinsic motivator, but the companies that I've seen most successful at it didn't do that. It's just part of who they are and part of the culture. I've worked for places where absolutely I was, dinged or congratulated based on how many folks in my team that I got promoted. Right? There was an expectation. There's an expectation that if we have a team training, you go with the team, right? Like how many managers were like, "Oh, I got this for you. Go on," right? So again, it's a cultural thing. Either your company believes in it or it doesn't. Now, it's fair for companies to say like, "Hey, that's not really our jam. We hire experienced professionals. That's what we do." And so if you're like junior career, like probably don't come here. Right? It's fair.
Yeah, be honest with yourself.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is who we are. We're not looking to like mentor people. Sorry, that's just not how we're structured. Or you can say like, hey, our approach is you own it. So through to your point, right? Like I love, and I feel like I don't see this enough places. I've seen it in management consulting. I've seen it one or two other places, but not enough, honestly, where the annual review and the annual promotion cycle, right, is not led by the manager. It's led by the employee. So if you think that you want to be promoted, it is your job to put together this packet of materials, which includes, right, feedback from others and list of projects you've completed and other accomplishments. It is your job to put that together and then pass that on upward. And listen, I'm sure your manager's supportive and would give you cues if they thought you were way off track. But one of the things I try to teach my undergraduates is we do this. They're young. So one of the things I try to teach them is like your boss and your boss's boss, like if you're lucky, they kind of think about your growth and development. But mostly what they think about is themselves and their job and their raise and their promotion and their rating, which is not unreasonable, right? But if you think it's their job to like sit there and be like constantly on the lookout for you, good luck. I think that's 1 in a million.
Well, so then how do we speak to somebody that is looking for that mentorship, is looking for that potentially in-person experience? Like what does that look like for them to get those experiences and get those opportunities? So, Elaine, through either of you, I think anybody young in their career would benefit from sitting down or working, next to one of you. And even, this makes me slightly non sequitur, but even for my cousins, I remember when they were growing up, they're like, oh, debating and hemming and hawing where they want to go professionally. I remember my advice to them at that time was like, literally go find the person you respect most in your industry and get them coffee, because the amount of information that you learn from them just being in their ecosystem is massive. Like, and it's, from my perspective, a bit of a real world MBA. It's like to really work hand in hand with somebody, and then you kind of really start to get it a little bit more. So like if you knew that if there is a person on your team or that you know of, just generally a student or whatever, that like has an interest in getting some mentorship or getting your ear or advice on something, like what does that look like? How do they make that step, or what is appropriate to get some time with either of you?
I think closed mouths don't get fed. That's just my just ask, right? Like a lot of people, remember, people like to talk about themselves and people like to help. Generally speaking, we're human and we like to do all of that. Yes, you have time constraints, but if somebody asks, generally most people would say yes, absolutely, would love to do that. And so I think it's just ask, go to bat, right? Ask and see if you can get there. Again, like I said, most people will say yes. And so I think it's just take that step, have the courage to ask. And I think for the leaders that do get asked, pay it forward, right? You had it done, like you got it, pay it forward and do that and give back to the folks that you've gotten the opportunity to do. So I just think it's ask, but I think it's not just generic, like, hey, I'd love leadership advice. Like that's not that compelling, because a lot of leaders get that, especially if you're at a CEO or in the C-suite of a large organization, they get that all the time. So make a special request. Like, what are you really trying to learn about yourself? Which might take some digging on self-awareness. Like, what are you trying to learn? Like maybe a specific example, maybe asking for 15 minutes, not an hour, things like that to get into the middle of, onto their schedule, I think are big.
Yeah, I agree. Look, we are fortunate that we live in a culture where power is demonstrated by people saying yes, right? There are other cultures where people demonstrate power by saying no. But we're one where power is demonstrated by saying yes. You know this, Thru. Like, you say yes to stuff all the time and people are super grateful, right? So take advantage of that and ask. Be mindful, be specific about what your ask is. Be mindful of time and that kind of thing. The other thing I run into a lot from folks is like, well, I don't know anybody. And I do this exercise in my class, which I love. And I have all the students start and I say, okay, we're going to write down the number of people that you know. And so I'm like, give me round numbers, like round off by tens, right? How many people in your family? How many people went to your high school? How many people, like, do you know from your summer job? Do you know from class, your dorm, your clubs, your sport, your blah, blah, blah. And generally speaking, and they're hilarious because they're like, well, like, do they have to know me? I'm like, yeah, they have to know your name for this to count. Okay. Do they have to be alive? Yeah, I mean, no disrespect to the dead, but like they're not super useful for networking if they're dead. Anyway, so, live people know your name. Okay, so, but they generally get to somewhere between 600 and maybe 1,500 people, right? So parents of friends, I'm like the whole caboodle, right? And then I say, okay, now there are, 25 of us in this class. Multiply your numbers out, right? Add them all together. And collectively, and this is before we even add me, right? 14. And they're like, well, and then they say the automatic, which I'm sure a lot of listeners are saying right now, well, we don't really know 14,000 people. Fair, I get it. That's true, right? But you have access to 14,000 people. Now, what are you trying to access? An industry, a job type, a certain company, right? And now go from there and weave through that network to get there. And you can do it.
I love it.
So it's not like, it's not quite like 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, but we're all like, we can all
need to
get
update
there.
it to the current generation. Let's go 6 degrees of like, I don't know, Taylor Swift. I feel like there's a network.
That'd be amazing. I'd love to be 6 degrees from Taylor Swift.
You probably are. No, this is exciting. So, I do want to say something real quick because I guess going back to even what I was saying regarding like the culture of an organization, I am thinking about just a name because that's all I have to base it on. But hospitals, like I feel like when certain hospitals are teaching hospitals, and I don't actually know about how that works, but I feel like there is something also. So for you specifically, like you also operate a little bit differently than say like a regular manager, skip manager or whatnot. Like you are the CEO and founder of an organization. You benefit from everybody within your organization operating at their best. So like, yes, I think as anybody would think somewhat selfishly as well, but like your job from my perspective is really to make sure that like your team is, rising to the occasion, working to their best capabilities. So it comes back to the whole culture component where I feel like and I don't know how that looks, but like if somebody is able to like really ingrain like this whole teaching component or make that a priority within organizationally, I think the organization ultimately will make multiples on investments and this is based on absolutely nothing but a wild guess, 20 years working. I think it's important to ingrain it culturally. I really do, from top down.
Can I just say, like, I think what people don't always connect is that the purpose of culture from a business perspective, right, is not, yes, we want everybody to feel good and welcome and all those things. Great. But it's really to make sure that on that random Wednesday afternoon, when you have a choice between project A and project B, or you have 2 hours that you can fill with something, or you have a certain way to approach a problem, that in general, we all go after it the same way for the same end result, right? And so it's a shame that we don't deeper dive into what that looks like in onboarding, into really like behaviors, right? Again, we're good at terms, we're just not good at like actual behaviors of what that looks like, right? So for example, at 37 Signals, part of the culture and part of what was really important from a value perspective was having good judgment. Well, I can tell you all day, like, hey, Jackie, you should have good judgment. You'll be like, yeah, of course I have good judgment.
But what does that mean?
But what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? What does that look like? How is good judgment defined and identified in our organization? And it's that whole piece beyond task. We think about performance as task, and it's this whole thing beyond task. So I think of jobs as skill, engagement, coachability, right? So skill is the task. Can you do the thing? Are you good at Excel or whatever it is we ask you to do? Engagement, do you show up how we want you to show up? And that's a very culture and organization specific way, right? That's how you say, we expect you to show up as a leader. We expect you to demonstrate these kinds of qualities no matter where you are in the organization. And then coachability, do you seek feedback? When you get feedback, what do you do with it? Whose job is it to solicit the feedback? Whose job is it to action the feedback? And it's those other two where we just tend not to be specific enough with folks about what our expectation is at this company, in this place, and how you're doing on it. And we have lots of ways to measure task. This is a Simon Sinek ripoff, but we have lots of ways to measure task. We have like no ways to measure these other things. And so, right? So is it surprising that we're not great at it? Probably not, but still needs work.
So we started this conversation too about reinventing work, and I feel like what I'm gathering for this is like I think we need to fix work. Like there's a fix right now that I think is needed. It's like, and I don't know if we're going to do it, but it's like I think and I don't think it's globally. I don't think it's even North America. It's like within individual organizations, and in terms of fixing, I don't know, contributing to, encouraging culture, building out culture, like there's the role of leadership, and then what is the role of the front line in also supporting or helping really enforce a culture, even starting one. I don't know, like it feels broken right now. It does.
It's totally broken. I think you have to start with a real conversation on culture. Like you also have to start, culture and goals go hand in hand. Like, and it also has to do with a reflection of how are the leaders have to, I would say, the front line of culture, right? They have to believe in it. They have to be it. They have to represent it. And that's what I'm putting on my team this year as we go into 2025 and are in planning mode of setting up for a great 2025 is, I want to really think about we need to make sure that we continue to drive a performance culture. But I want us to each individually come back to the table and say, what does that mean and what can I actually lead? Because I can say it, right? At my side, I could be like, I expect high performance. I expect everybody to hit their goals, and we can put a percentage of, on our goals worksheet, we have to get to this to define a performance culture. I said, but if I'm the only one driving that means that we don't have a culture. That means that we have, autocrat something, right? And that's not enjoyable to me. That's not what I want to do. I want my team to be able to be empowered to do it. So there's got to be leadership alignment to figure out, yes, we have a goal, right? And it's going to be sales. Most time, every organization has a sales and growth goal, right? And that's going to have to be the case. And there's likely going to be a bottom line goal, and there's going to be alignment around that. So if we just think broadly speaking, those are the two transactional goals that we have. Think about how we get there, right? As a team, not as a single person. And I keep telling, even my team, what is your role in that, right? How can you drive that performance culture? So let's take a step back and define what that performance culture means to us. And what does a performance philosophy mean to us? Like, how do we hold ourselves accountable to that performance philosophy so that we can follow that culture and create that culture? And I'm putting that to the test right now as a team, because I think we've lost a little bit of our way, and not cohesion alone, right? I've heard this from all of my founder friends, that it's really tough. We're coming out of a very, very strange time to be a business leader. We've had to be flexible, but with that flexibility came a lot of taking advantage of a company. Again, I'm a business owner, so I'm going to lean towards the business owner side of it. But at the same time, I have my employees tell me everything about their personal lives, and I'm not scared of that, right? I'm not the business leader that says, no, please don't tell me. I don't want to know because I don't want to care. I'm the business leader that says, yeah, okay, how do we balance all of that now? How do we, it's a push and a pull. And right now I had one of my employees that was like, I really got to do a weekend with my wife. I'm working too much. I said, go, I've got you. And that becomes that's my culture of team. We're going to cover each other. Life happens. We're going to have a communication structure. And so I built this, what I think works in my organization. Now, whether or not I've done it perfectly over time, I can't say I have.
It's not the expectation.
No, but it's I think that my team has learned that communication is the way to go. And flexible work schedules is what we're at. And I think that works for me and my organization. So I can define what I think can work for us up top, but it is me and my leadership team that all have to be responsible for understanding what our culture is and what our philosophy is for some of these things. And I think that opening up the dialogue for that is going to be important. I also have an all staff that I do, that all my employees come together. And one of the things that we do a lot of is role playing. How would you define the office? And we're looking at this right now, kind of coming back to like reinventing the office or returning to office or whatever we kind of call it. I have a lease coming up in June of this year. I recently gave in to a group of my employees to come to the office 1 day a week. The rest of my commercial team is coming in 3 days a week, and we have flexibility, and we even have people coming to the office on the days that aren't required. So we're starting to see that people really are enjoying the office, and the people who really want to be in is what Elaine said, the younger folks. And people are in and out. They might come in for a half a day and they might go, but we're all communicating where we're at. It's almost like the AIM, remember the AIM chat message, the away message that said, hey, I'm at a doctor's appointment. That stuff is communication, and it's not invasive, right? That's the part that I think we have to rethink what we think. Like Big Brother, there's no Big Brother. It's called communication, and it's called I don't know. I think it's called trust. And I think we've got to rebuild the trust amongst each other and rebuild what communication looks like. Now, it doesn't work everywhere, but I think I can say from a smaller company, that is absolutely what we have to do. And I think that employees have to define that for themselves too. So that's the approach that we're taking walking into 2025. So how do you rebuild? I think it's opening up the lines of communication and taking a real big self-reflection, self-awareness survey.
Yeah, I get behind that. I mean, and we should have touched on this earlier. I mean, trust is such a huge component of workplace effectiveness. I really wish I had a better term than that. That's kind of crappy. It's such a huge, right? It affects how you work. It affects your relationship with others. We've all worked in environments where there was more trust and less, and more beats less every single day. Right. And so how do you build that trust? Well, we build that trust by interactions between each other. We build that trust between open communication. I mean, what I really respect is companies who are just, like, hey, we're dragging everybody back into the office. I shouldn't say it that way. That's biased. We're asking everybody to come back into the office because revenue is down 10% year on year. And we can't figure out why. And until we can figure out why, like, this is a thing we're going to do. Right? Let's just be that. Right? Yeah, let's own it. Right? As opposed to trying to paint it over with, some other kind of stuff. I think, like, your employees are adults, presumably. They understand that the company exists, that has to create revenue targets. Everybody likes to get a paycheck. That's where that comes from.
Yep.
So, we talk a lot about, like, the workers' privileges. Well, like, the paycheck is one of those things that we have to get to go. And so I think, having people understand why and being really clear about that why is both good for transparency and good for building motivation. I don't know what your bigger picture mission is that you tell people about cohesion, and, what's the grander vision there?
You were asking me, sorry.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, we're changing the way the physical and the built worlds operate to make it more efficient, to be better for the planet, and to be better for human connection. That's what I'm a big believer in physical space being part of community. It is what has always, it's driven societies for centuries. It's just physical space is part of a community, and I don't think that we can ignore that. So I believe it's the fabric of society in general.
And so I would imagine that, a lot of your employees, like, maybe don't think about it every single minute, but right, that's part of what they like about being part of your firm as opposed to any other one. And so when they see their work as part of fulfillment of that mission, like, it's important. It feels good. That's why, that's why I got into journalism way back in the day, right? Because I believed in free press, and I believed in, dissemination of information, that kind of thing. And so it's like, we all have choices about where we're going to get our paycheck from. What else is there in it for us, right, that makes us choose this place over another place? And maybe if I had a big, like, takeaway around future of work, and I'm not a good future prognosticator, by the way, but I think there's a reckoning here where companies need to be clearer and unashamed and not give excuses, right, about who they are and what they are and why. And then employees can make a choice about what matters to them and where they want to be. So if you are at Tractor Supply and they give up their DEI programs, and DEI is a big deal for you, right, then you won't go work there, right? And that's your choice. And it doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make you wrong, but it's a choice that you make. If you have a company with no employee development, great. That's not what you wanted anyway. And that's what I'd really like to see, right? And then we can get away maybe the gig work part of it. The people who want to do that can go on Fiverr and be gig workers and whatever. And the people who want to be part of something bigger and feel like, like they're see their place in the whole can join organizations where that's an opportunity for them.
Are there any additional points that maybe we haven't addressed that either of you would like to touch on?
I'll kind of go into, as we think about, we talked a lot of the philosophical part of space and culture. And I think that as much as we think about, obviously we're a software organization that helps create the physical spaces that make people more efficient, right, and productive and better environments. For what I think, when we think about physical space, we can't just think about, oftentimes it's an architect that is designing the use cases of what people can do, not the how people do it in space. And a lot of the frustration, remember, as a society, right, people have less patience today because everything is more instant. There's instant gratification on how people interact, right? Mobility, digitalization, all of that has made people get what they want in real time. And so making sure that we think about the physical space, the physical space works in today's world. And so I see a lot of folks that won't invest in physical real estate, won't spend money, will, buy great art, but not put in software to make sure that people like self-service. Like, why am I carrying around a plastic key card when I have everything? I pay out of my wallet and my phone. Why is that the norm of physical spaces? Why, this is my big gripe, like, why do I have to come into the office in which the bathroom, a shared bathroom, is disgusting and doesn't get cleaned at night? Like, that is stuff that is about employee experience, not I get a perk. My perk is a clean toilet. I get one at home, so I would like one at the office. Like, things like that people don't really think about. Like, hey, I
like
want
shouldn't
this
be a
stuff.
perk.
Like, well, I know it
Shouldn't be
expected, right? It shouldn't be. But like, people don't think about that. I have so many conversations to say, oh, how much money is that going to cost me? Well, it's the reason, some of the reason that people don't want to come to the, right. And like, the other one is like, I don't want to invest in heating and cooling, but I talked to this woman who used to work for a big airline company and in one of the biggest buildings in Chicago. And she was like, listen, it's not that I don't care to come into the office. I don't want to freeze. It's like 65 degrees in the office and I have to dress in winter clothes in the summer and then take everything, and I can set my temperature to what I want in my home. So why would I want to be uncomfortable? Because being uncomfortable makes me less productive. So all of these things with the physical space, we can't just think about it as here's the conference room setup. Like, I need 15 conference rooms. It's what do people do in the space and how can we make that comfortable and make them their best selves, as productive as they can be? And then also then bringing in those cultural elements. So obviously, I believe in workspaces that work for people. And I think that it has to be designed in that way. And so that requires conversation across different departments and across different stakeholders of what a physical space and how that can work for you.
I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely right. Because it's like, hey, you can have the best culture, but to your point, like, if the toilets are nasty and the building's freezing, no thank you. I mean,
Actually, can I tack onto that? So I've spent a bunch of time in different reworks across the country, across the globe. I generally like them. I like the styling, I like the amenities, et cetera, et cetera. I worked with a company where they had gotten rid of their distributed offices and they had just put everybody into reworks. And the employees were in an uproar. They're like, we hate it here. We hate it. This is not representative of our company brand. I just saw a guy walk down the hall in shorts. What's going on here? And seriously, right? And I was like, gosh, I don't think this is so bad. And they were like, no, this is all wrong. This is all wrong. So disgusting toilets is, I think, a universal bad. But it's interesting to me, again, how much employees like identify with what kind of physical space and what kind of experience that you offer there. Which again, to your point, Thru, like, it's not just about like, are there conference rooms or, have whatever, right? It's what's the whole thing. So I think that's really interesting.
And not drastically make changes because of the implications that could potentially lead from that. Meaning, like, don't just up and get rid of your office and everything if the expectation, if you're moving to a rework and your team is going to be like, no, like, can we buy into this? Because ultimately, you will have attrition then, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So like, I think if we summarize it, right? Culture, definition of culture, and figuring out what you want. Communication, inclusiveness of voice to see what do all of the stakeholders want, and proper design that goes beyond, that takes in all of the elements and the facets of your culture, of your space, of your people.
Yeah.
And then communication again, and then communication all the time.
I think if I just had one more thing to add there, I would say, again, I strongly held believer that there's not one right answer. I strongly held believer that remote work is very good for a bunch of things, right? Certain jobs, certain kinds of productivity, access to talent, all kinds of things. And remote work is very bad for other things, like, in-depth collaboration and creating like a good onboarding experience and mentoring and development, all those things. And so as a company, whatever you pick is fine, but know what you've traded off, and then know like how you're going to make up for those trade-offs if that's something that you didn't actually want to trade off, right? And then what tools are we giving? Say it again, like, we've missed out on giving our management teams the tools that they need to operate differently, to manage a hybrid team differently, right? And it's gotten very tricky. And we've missed some of the basics, right, about how do we manage performance, and did we even tell them what was expected up front, and did we really tell them, or did we just tell them, the transactional stuff, right? And so I think in the course of the last 4.5 years, arguably many were never great at it, but I don't think we've improved at all. So how can we provide better support there?
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. Thank you both for your insights. I didn't anticipate where this conversation would go, and it's been incredibly enlightening and interesting. How can people find you, or is there anything that you would like to promote? Please let listeners know.
Sure. So I'm at the University of Denver, so I'm on their website, but you can reach me directly, elaine.richards at du.edu. And I'm continually investigating future of work and teams and leadership. So if you have any thoughts or interested in participating in that research, please let me know.
Great. I can be reached at Thru Shivakumar at cohesionib.com or on my LinkedIn. Reach out if you want to understand what are the different technology options for physical spaces, or even if you want to understand what is it that you don't want to, if you're designing spaces or rethinking your space and want just to talk about what are things and considerations that you should have. We offer advisory services as well as software for our clients. And if you just want to have an initial conversation, I can talk about this all day long. So reach out, please.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.